material, but the downside is that you have an exam on your plate fairly soon. Spring break is barely 3 weeks away, so the week before spring break is 2 weeks from now. Okay, so I'm going to schedule the exam on that week, Wednesday of that week, which is actually 2 weeks from today. Okay, send out a note about this, but I just wanted to make sure what you thought. There is a lab that is due next week. I'm willing to be a little flexible about that lab and give it some extra time so you can hand it in after the midterm should you want to take advantage of anything like that. Okay? Anybody have anything to say? Comments on this? I have to do things a little out of order because if otherwise the latter part of the course is going to be fairly heavy. There will be exams coming up, there will be labs that we have backloaded. So rather than pushing everything post spring break, I wanted to balance things out a little. We lost 3 classes, so this is sort of unusual. Any comments or anybody have any vehement objections to what I'm proposing? Everyone's happy with that. I thought we wouldn't like it, but nobody said anything. Anyway, let me know if you have any comments even after the class. I will start the class for now. Okay, so I'm going to continue from where we left off last time. You remember we were talking about remote procedure calls and remote method invocations, RMI, which are the incarnation of RPCs in the Java world. And so we are done with that material. At this point, you have at least some notion of how to go about writing client-server applications, which you could then use for your lab assignments that are handed out. So what I'm going to do today is actually continue that discussion and talk about some more issues in communication and distributed systems. Specifically, I'm going to talk a little bit about message-oriented communication paradigms, which relate to persistence and synchronicity. I'll talk about what they mean. I also want to discuss stream-oriented communication, which we haven't looked at all. We only talked about request-response paradigms, which are implemented using RPCs and so on. But there's another class of protocols that are stream-oriented, that are used for push-based architectures, streaming audio and video being an example. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how streaming systems work, how communication using streaming systems is very different from whatever we've been seeing so far. Okay, so that's basically a snapshot of where we are headed. So this picture essentially shows a typical communication infrastructure. There's a sending host and there's a receiving host. I already mentioned 2 classes ago that there is a network in between. Okay? Typically the network consists of routers. The routers are responsible for taking any packet that's sent from the sender and sending it hop by hop over the network until it reaches the destination. And that's what a typical network router does. Okay, what we'll also look at today are this other class of routers that are also responsible for long time scale buffering and of messages and so on. Okay, so routers can perform many tasks. Typically they simply forward packet, okay, but they can also do store and forward, not just forward, as we will see in some of the paradigms that we see today. Okay. So let me start with, so there are 2 dimensions we'll talk about. One is whether communication is persistent or transient. The other one is whether communication is synchronous or asynchronous. And depending on which combination you pick, you will get several different paradigms that we will talk about. Okay, let me first talk about the persistence dimension, and then I'm going to talk about the synchronous, asynchronous communication. Okay. So persistent communication essentially says that when you have hop by hop forwarding of network packets or messages, as I just showed you in the previous slide, messages are going to be stored, okay, until the next receiver is ready to take delivery of the message. Okay. Now this is how the mail system works, mail meaning the postal mail system. And here's an example of how it worked in the really old days where you had ponies to deliver mail, not mail trucks, and The way post offices would work is essentially they would get some mail, they would sort it into different bins, and each bin would be destined for the next post office along the route. There will be these ponies and riders, of course, who would actually take the mail and deliver it to the next office. Okay, so it would be stored at each intermediate destination, okay? And at each destination it gets resorted, and then there are different routes going out from one post office to many others neighboring post offices, and you send it on one of these until it sort of keeps propagating and reaches its eventual destination. That's a good analogy for the kind of store and forward communication that I'm talking about. Okay, in our case, the post offices are replaced by routers. Routers are actually going to store messages for arbitrary periods of time. Okay? These are different from some of the networks that routers you may be familiar with, that are simply doing IP forwarding. Okay? They don't actually do any buffering, or at least not long-term buffering. Okay? So that's an example of persistent communication. Okay? An application that implements such a paradigm is email. Okay? You can think of this same paradigm where when you send a mail message, there are intermediate mail relays. Okay? Mail relays actually have disk-based queues where they have a queue of outstanding messages that are not being sent, and you do hop-by-hop delivery. Each relay is going to send the mail to the next one along the path until your mail gets to the destination. Even at the destination, the mail is going to be stored in the inbox of the user until the user takes delivery. Okay, so at each point there is a persistent queue that is used to store messages. Okay? So this is called persistent communication. Any questions on this? Okay. So we'll contrast this with what is not persistent, that's called transient communication. Transient communication is the kind of messaging that we have been talking about so far. So in this case, the message is stored, is buffered for only temporary periods of time until the sending and the receiving application can take delivery. We assume that both the sender and the receiver in this case, as well as intermediate nodes, are executing. Okay? So they can take delivery in short periods of time. You don't need to buffer messages for long periods of time. So in this case, you're actually going to discard the message if it cannot be delivered to the next hop. Okay? So we assume in transient communication that senders and receivers are actually running, okay, they're executing, and if you cannot take delivery, you basically drop the message. Right? IP routers work this way. Okay? A router will simply discard a message if the next hop router is down for any reason. It's not going to keep it until the router comes back up. That you can do if you have persistent mode of communication, but IP routing doesn't require that. Okay? So most of the communication we've been talking about, which is TCP, UDP based communication, falls under the transient category. Okay? Because you basically assume that the sender and the receiver are running, both endpoints are up, and you just send a message, it propagates and it reaches the other end. Okay? So typical network routers, transport protocol like TCP are the transient category. Okay? So that's persistent versus transient. The other dimension is whether communication is synchronous or asynchronous. Okay? Synchronous communication simply means blocking communication. When a sender sends a message, it's going to block. Okay? Wait for the message to be, wait for an acknowledgement to come back, okay, from the recipient. Okay? So you wait until it's received at the other end, or wait until it's received by the application at the other end. Okay? So that's called synchronous communication. Asynchronous is non-blocking communication. You simply send a message and you continue, you don't wait for the message to actually be received at the other end. Okay? Example of asynchronous communication would be email. Okay? You send an email, okay, the mail goes out and you continue doing something. Your mail client doesn't actually block until your mail message has been received at the other end. Okay? You can continue doing something in the meantime. Okay? So that's an example of asynchronous. So there are many ways to do non-blocking. This is just one example of how it works. And synchronous simply means you block. Okay? RPCs that we've been talking about are examples of synchronous communication. Okay? Traditional RPCs, you send a message or make a request to a remote procedure call, you wait for a reply. That's a blocking form of communication. Okay? So we are now going to look at various combinations of these, whether communication is persistent or transient, which means whether messages will be stored until the receiver is ready, or messages are simply kept forwarded, and if the next stop is not ready, you drop the message. Okay. So the first combination is persistent asynchronous communication. Okay. And as I mentioned there, email is an example application that uses persistent asynchronous communication. Okay. So here is a picture of how this works. This is a timeline. Okay. So as we have seen before, if you have a black line, that means that that entity is executing. If it's dotted, means it's not, it's locked, or it's doing something else. Okay. So as you can see here, A is the sender, B is the receiver. Okay. A is simply going to send and continue. Okay. And some arbitrary period of time later, B is going to take delivery of the message. Okay. So this is called persistent asynchronous communication. So let's think a little bit about why does this picture depict persistent communication? Yes. Okay, A is not running when B receives the message. So this period of time between the send and the receive could be arbitrary, which means that your communication medium or your distributed system has to store the message for an arbitrary period of time before delivery can be made. Okay? And that means the messages have to be persistent in the system. They can't just disappear because the recipient is not ready. Okay, now think about why email maps onto this example. Yes. Okay, so basically when you send an email, you don't require that the recipient is actively sitting in their mail client waiting for messages. Mail goes out, it goes to their inbox. At some arbitrary later period of time, it could be minutes, hours, days later, when the recipient checks their mail, they will take delivery of the message. So the message is going to persist in their inbox in this case. Okay, that's a disk-based queue of messages. Okay, so hence it's persistent. We are not going to require the receiver to be there at some point in time. Okay. So you have to, from a email type application perspective, if you compare email with, let's say, instant messages, okay, there both parties have to be present. Okay, you are sending messages back and forth. When you send a message, it goes to the other end, okay, and then you get a reply. Okay, that's a different form of communication from email, which is going to say that the delivery can be taken at some arbitrary later point in time. So let's look at the next one, which says persistent and synchronous. Okay. So in this case also, the data is going to be stored for some arbitrary period of time because it's persistent communication, but it's now synchronous, which means it's blocking. That's what is shown here. Okay. So A is executing, A is the sender, A sends a message, and you wait for an acknowledgement to come back before you continue executing. Okay. And then delivery of that message can take place at some arbitrary later time because it's persistent, is going to be queued there. Okay? What example can you think of an application you have used that may actually map onto this? Online what? Online bank payments. Okay, so what is the sender? What is the receiver there?
If you are buying something at Amazon,
Okay.
and then you enter your credit card details, so that time I'll be here. And then if it goes to gateway, so basically I'm blocked every time I get a receipt saying that the payment has been done. So
Okay.
that means it has to be synchronous and persistent.
Okay, so where is the persistent part? How does that work? Sort of there, but I would not use that particular example. So if you have used, just to give a slightly different example, if you use some versions of online messaging application, not all of them, but let's say you have iMessage or some such application, you can send a message. It's like an SMS message, but it goes over a data network. it goes to the other end. But if you have what are called read delivery receipts turned on, you get an ACK saying it was delivered. Okay? Just because delivered doesn't mean it's been read. Two different things. Just reach the phone of the recipient, and it's going to be stored there for some arbitrary period of time. At some later point, the person may actually open the messaging application and read your message. That's their taken delivery of the message. Okay, so that you can think of as an example of persistent synchronous. Okay, so you're synchronous because you're waiting for an ACK to come back. A typical SMS won't map into this. SMS is just send. You're not waiting for an ACK saying the phone at the other end has received it. You just get a saying it's been sent and not received. But some of these messaging applications actually send you delivery receipts saying yes, it reached the other end. Some email systems do that also, not all of them, where actually you get back a message saying yes, it has actually been received, and you'll block until that period. Okay, but that's an example of persistent synchronous. Okay. Now we will go to transient and look at the transient category. So the first one is transient asynchronous. There is a picture here which says that A is going to, so transient essentially means messages are not going to be stored in the network. So you want the sender and the receiver to be running essentially. You can't come 3 days later and take delivery of the message. They have to be running more or less at the same time. There could be short-term buffering, okay, just because you may not be scheduled for execution. Okay, so first one is transient and asynchronous. So asynchronous means non-blocking. Right? And the example what I've shown there is UDP communication is transient and non-blocking. So you can simply do a send and continue. Okay? Because UDP is connectionless, you don't have to wait for a connection to be established, you don't wait for acknowledgement, there are no acknowledgements in UDP and so on. So A simply continues, and then B has to be actually, the endpoint has to be up, and the process has to be running for it to take delivery, and the delivery is going to take place once it reaches them, when the message has reached them. So it is transient and it is asynchronous, it's not blocking. Is that clear? Questions here? So then the last one is transient synchronous. Okay, so we've done all the other three combinations. So in the transient synchronous, we'll look at three flavors of transient synchronous. Okay? So what happens in transient synchronous, again, you have to have both endpoints running because it's transient communication, no long-term buffering. But it's synchronous, which means you are going to wait for an acknowledgement to come back. Okay? And the three flavors depend on what the ACK tells you has happened. Okay? So the ACK means something, that the message got to the other end and you got an ACK. But the meaning of the ACK could be different depending on the exact scenario. And depending on that, we'll get three flavors of transient synchronous. The first one is receipt based. That's shown there. The ACK simply means that your message got to the other machine that it was being sent to. Okay? It's been received by the machine. That's all that the ACK says. This is what's shown here. A is running, A sends a message, A is blocked, because it's synchronous communication. Okay, message gets to the other end, ACK comes back. ACK just says that the machine received it, but it hasn't actually been taken, the message delivery hasn't taken place, so B hasn't actually taken delivery of the message or hasn't processed it yet. Okay? Message receipt based transient communication. Let me show you the other two flavors. So then there is delivery based, okay, which says that an ACK essentially means that the message not only got there, it has also been delivered to the application. Okay. The previous case it is with the OS. The application hasn't actually taken delivery. In this case, not only did the OS at the other end receive it, the application has actually taken delivery. That is what the ACK says, and the application has accepted the message. Hasn't been processed yet. Okay. That's delivery based, okay, transient synchronous. The last one is response-based transient synchronous, which says not only did your message go to the other end, not only was it delivered, it's been processed and a reply has come back. So the ACK comes with a reply saying, here is a response. Okay? And in all of those cases, the sender is going to be blocked because it's synchronous communication. Yeah, response-based transient synchronous is nothing but RPCs. Okay, so you send a request, it gets processed, reply comes back, you're blocked until all of that has happened. Okay? These two other, so this one is asynchronous RPC, okay? Because basically it just says your RPC request is received by the server, okay? But it's going to process it at some later time and send back a reply. Okay, so you will get three flavors of transient. The main difference is what is the acknowledgement that's come back, what does it tell you has actually happened at the other side. Okay, whether the OS received it, the application received it, or the application processed. Any questions in this?
What's an example of a transient receipt-based synchronous communication?
Okay, so what is an example of transient receipt based? I don't have an example from sort of a real life application, but I will talk about MPI systems where you will see all three flavors being represented. You can actually say when you send and an ACK comes back, what you want to happen, and it will basically guarantee that. So we'll come to that in a few slides. Another question? Yes,
So
no
what
question.
kind of MSN is because if you remember when you use MSN, the receiver has to be online.
What is MSN? Is that
Yeah.
what you're asking?
Yeah.
Instant messaging?
Yeah,
Is that
if
what
you
you're-
remember a long time ago we used that. So in that the receiver must be online so that you can send your
Yes.
message.
So question is what is instant messaging through MSN? There are many such. Yahoo Messenger, Google Messenger.
No, that's different. So if you remember that, so now the receiver is not asked to be online.
Yes. So
But,
you can have some instant messaging systems will actually allow you to queue the message. You can send a message even if the user is not online, and they can take delivery at a later time.
Yeah, but the MSN, the receiver has to be online so that you can send the message.
Yes. So if you are basically that would fall under transient communication where both parties have to be there. It's the same as what you would have in socket communication. Where both parties have to be running for communication to take place. Okay, so that's basically the basic form of instant messaging says that both parties are online and sending messages back and forth. More modern ones just relax that a little bit and buffer the message even if the user is not online. Okay, so I would put that under transient communication, and you can, depending on whether you block until you get a reply or you just send a message, it could be synchronous or asynchronous. Okay. So transient, synchronous, asynchronous is probably the right one unless your read receipts or ACKs turned on. Any other questions?
When you talk about asynchronous RPC and then synchronous communication, are they kinds of different synchronizations?
Can you repeat?
So the asynchronous RPC, when you
Yes.
talk about it, sends a message, goes on to the workflow.
Yeah.
But here, it's an example for the synchronous communication.
Yes, okay, so that's a good question. Good point. So, the messaging paradigm is transient, synchronous, and the question is why are we calling asynchronous RPCs as synchronous communication? That's your question, right? It's a good point. Asynchronous, so the terminology may be a little bit off, but they actually are consistent. So the asynchronous part of RPC simply means you don't wait for the reply, but nevertheless you are blocked for something to happen. Okay? And that blocking makes it, some part of the asynchronous RPC is still synchronous. In this case, you are blocked until you get an ACK. Okay, so a synchronous RPC, which is the traditional RPC, is blocked until you wait for the RPC to be processed. So it's asynchronous in that I'm not going to wait until the reply is received, but I'm at least waiting for the ACK to be received. So part of it is synchronous, but then I continue. So that part is asynchronous. So that is where the terminology may be a little off, but it is actually example of delivery-based transient asynchronous or transient synchronous. Any other questions here? Okay, so I'm going to now talk a little bit about transient communication paradigm just as a precursor to persistent ones. And here we'll talk a little bit about socket-based communication, which some of you, anyone who's taken any networking class or has done any network programming would understand this. I'm going to quickly talk about this. Then we'll talk about more advanced systems that do this, such as MPI. And then we'll talk mostly about persistent communication, because I mentioned those, but we haven't given any examples. So we'll discuss message queuing systems and things like that that do this for us. Okay. So let's start with socket communication. Okay. So this is an example of transient communication. Okay? You use network sockets for the client and the server to communicate, and here is basically the pipeline of all the steps that are going to be executed by the sender and the receiver for communication to take place. This is the lowest level of network communication you can think of. Okay? When we talked about RPCs, you are actually programming at a much higher level of abstraction. Underneath your RPC runtime system may be actually performing some of these steps, but they're hidden from the program. Okay, but if you choose to actually program it using not raw sockets but low level sockets, then you will have to implement your code using this structure that is shown here. Okay, so here is basically, so all of these are calls that you have to execute in your code. Typically this happens in C, Java is slightly different. Okay, so you have to basically first establish a socket, you make the socket call saying I want to create a new socket. Okay. Then you bind to that socket, okay, which basically allows you to then start waiting for requests. Okay, so then do a listen on the socket, that at that point you're going to essentially start listening for net requests to come over a network, okay, or messages to come over a network. Okay. At the client end also you have to establish a socket, okay, and then you have to do a run connect for the client to actually connect to the server. At this point a connection is established. If this is a TCP socket, you are going to do a TCP handshake at this point. Okay. If you are using UDP, some of these steps are not necessary because you don't need to establish a connection. Okay. So this is where the client and the server connect to one another, and then at this point there is a two-way communication channel established using sockets, and then you can read and write messages, send and receive messages. They are equivalent. So you can send a message, it will be received at the other end using receive, or you can send it using write, okay, which means that when you write to a socket, the message is sent out, and then you read from a socket, which means you accept any messages that have come over a network. Okay. And so you can perform this step for an arbitrary number of times, implement whatever application you are trying to implement, and then you will close the connection. Okay. That's a typical network socket programming pipeline. Okay. Those are the steps that a server and a client would implement, okay, for communication to take place. Okay, so it's instructed to keep this picture in mind as we talk about other types of systems that also implement either transient or persistent communication. So I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions on this before I move on. Yes.
So in case of the web server, something like that, which keep on receiving requests, so it receives multiple requests. So for each request, does it create a socket for the connection with that particular client?
Okay. Question is, if you have a web server that is receiving multiple requests, will you create a socket for each of those? Okay, so first of all, if you have a web server and there are multiple clients, each client is going to establish a connection. Okay, so that's a separate socket for each client. Okay. So every client needs to establish a connection, so it would have its own socket. There will be two endpoints. Even at the server, you will be listening on a well-known port, but then the communication takes place over some other port. Okay, so for each client, you will have a separate socket. But having said that, you can ask that question slightly differently, which says, if your web server has an active connection to the server, a client has an active connection to the web server, can it use that for multiple HTTP requests? Will each HTTP request require its own connection? That depends on the protocol of HTTP you use. In HTTP 1.0, every HTTP request required a new connection to be established. When you send an HTTP request, it means you click on any link in your browser will establish a new connection. Okay, it will send a HTTP request over TCP, but to do TCP, you would have to execute this. Next time you click on a link, the old connection is torn down, you set up a new connection. Okay, so that is, since I mentioned previously that you have to do this TCP handshake, which is wasteful. In HTTP 1.1, you can keep the connection alive. You can send multiple requests on that connection. This is called persistent HTTP. We'll come back to HTTP when we do the web chapter. Okay, so in that case, you will basically have multiple sends and receives. You will send the HTTP request, get a reply. You won't close the connection. You will keep it alive, send another request, get a reply. So a single client can reuse a socket, at least in the HTTP 1.1 case, but across clients, independent sockets. Okay. Any other questions? So this is just a table that explains what each of those calls meant. So socket calls and establishes a new endpoint. When you, there are many arguments you have to include in the socket call, what protocol you want to use and so on. Okay. Bind will attach that to a local address. So bind will say, I want to listen on this port number. Okay, so if you're an HTTP server, you would bind on port 80. Okay, if you're an SSH daemon, you will bind on port 22. These are all port numbers that are used for well-known services. If you're writing your own application, you have to pick some unused port that's not reserved and bind to that port. The client has to connect to that port. Okay, that's the network address, IP address and port number will tell the client where to connect to. Okay, so you are essentially going to bind the address, local address to socket, then you listen, okay, where you are now saying I am willing to accept new connections. Okay. And then essentially you do an accept, which is a blocking call. Okay. When you do an accept, you just sit there waiting and you'll be listening on for network messages. Okay. Until some client sends a message, your server is going to be blocked on accept. Okay. Connect is used at the client end to establish a connection to the server. And then you can, as I said, you send or receive or read or write, the equivalent. Okay, you just take a socket and either do a send receive or you're going to do read or write. This is where actually messages are sent and received. Okay? All of this is just additional stuff you have to do to establish the connection or tear it up. Okay? This is where the communication actually takes place. Okay, if there are no questions, I'm going to continue and show you some other systems that takes this idea and expand it in various ways. Okay, so first one is MPI or message passing interface. Okay. This is a system that is used for scientific communication. Okay, or so the scientific applications performing communication. So if you have parallel applications or applications that require you to send a lot of data over a LAN, okay, often you use MPI libraries. These are highly optimized libraries that are designed for bulk communication at low cost. Okay? And they give you various abstractions as well, as we will see. Okay? So, if you have done any sort of scientific programming, you may actually have encountered MPI libraries. Okay? Rather than using TCP/IP, they use MPI. Okay? Which in some cases you are not actually going to pay the overhead of TCP and so on. So, they support a different set of interfaces as we will see. Okay, so now this is also going to be an example of transient communication, and moreover it also allows you to do group communication, which by default when you use TCP/IP it's one-to-one communication. You have one sender, one receiver. Okay, you can extend that in the context of multicast or broadcast, but the default model is one-to-one. MPI is designed for one-to-many as well as one-to-one. Okay, if you have a set of parallel jobs that are running, one job wants to send a message to all the other jobs that are part of the application, you can do a group sync. It will go to all of the other endpoints, and it does so very efficiently. Okay. So that's the background behind MPI. Okay, and what I wanted to actually talk about were these abstractions. So the MPI essentially generalizes what sockets do. Sockets have a send call and a receive call. Okay, and that's all they do. Here you will see that there are different flavors of send. There's a P send and there's a send and there's an S send and send receive and an I send and so on. Okay, only there are two receive calls. Okay, so you can use this to do blocking communication, non-blocking communication. All the examples I was talking about in terms of being synchronous, asynchronous, all of them are actually present here. So dsend is the simplest one, which simply says that copy the message to the local OS buffer and return. Okay? Don't even wait for the message to be sent out over the network. Simply give it to the local OS and return, the call returns, and you continue. Okay? So in this case, you have actually only thing you know is I have delivered my message to my local operating system and it is going to at some later point send it out. Okay? That's all that you will know if you use bsend. Okay? This sort of send into a buffer. Okay? Now send, which is the sort of analogous to what you have in virtually sockets or network sockets, is you send a message and you wait for it to have been copied to a remote buffer, okay, which means you wait for it to actually be received at least by the OS at the other end. Okay. This is similar to this picture here. Okay, this is receipt based. Okay, so you wait for the OS at the other end to receive it. Okay, so that is basically going to map onto the same MPI send call. Okay. S send says that you send a message and wait until receipt starts. You wait until you block until the application at the other end has taken delivery. Not only the OS, the remote OS, but the remote application has taken delivery of the application. So you will actually get an act when that happens. Okay. Send receive is you send a message and wait for the reply. This is sort of analogous to what RPCs would do. You send a message, it goes to the other end, you wait for delivery, you wait for processing, then you wait for the reply. So you'll be blocked. You do a send and then you are blocked until a reply comes back. Okay. This is a low level version of what RPCs will do for you. Okay. And then there are a couple of other calls which basically says you pass a reference to the outgoing message. You don't even copy, you pass a pointer. Okay, so that is used when you have to optimize the copying overheads that I talked about last time, and there's an analogous version for SSend. Okay. So these are all flavors of send, and as you will see, depending on what you want to implement in the application, is not just one send, but you have to pick which flavor of send are you going to use, what do you want to know when the message has gone out, you want an ACK, what does the ACK tell you. Okay, so you can, as you write, when you write an application, you have to pick one of these. And for the receive also there are two, there's a blocking receive and a non-blocking receive. Okay, blocking receive says if I call MPI receive in my application, I'm going to wait until a message is actually received. Okay, you just block. Okay. And if you do I receive, that's a polling based. That says do a receive if there's a message outstanding, if not just return. It is often used for polling. If you don't want to block, you do an I receive, there's nothing to receive, you just return saying no messages. And then you can check at some later time. So this is polling driven, you are not going to block until a message is received. Okay? Is that clear? Any questions on this? Yes, one question.
So just now you mentioned about TCP IP based, they have only transient message passing and for
Yes.
API different kinds of send and receive. Is there any reasons why API implement different kinds of send? And also, if I want to implement a persistent message passing in TCP IP, how can I do that?
Okay, how do you implement persistent TCP/IP? I will talk about persistent communication systems next. They're not just TCP/IP. You need additional mechanisms to create queues and so on that will persist. Okay, those are a completely different class of communication system. Most likely you may not have seen them before. At least TCP/IP you heard of and you have used and so on. Okay? So both MPI and socket-based communication fall under the transient category. They don't have queues that are going to be disk-based and persistent, so you are assuming both endpoints are there. Okay? Now you ask, why does it have multiple sends? Because if you are writing an application where you only want this type of send, it gives you that flexibility. Okay? In Berkeley sockets, you have only one kind of send. Okay? Here you can wait, the ACK can tell you different things, and it depends on what you want the application that you are writing to do for you. Are you okay with just copying, giving it to the OS? This is the fastest send, as you can imagine. There is no ACK at all. You simply hand the message to, this is really asynchronous in that sense, you hand it to the OS and say, now you do it at a later time, I'm going to continue doing something else. Okay? Or you can wait for an ACK saying, did the machine receive it? Did the application receive it? Has the application processed and generated a reply? Okay, so depending on what how you are writing the application, what you want it to do, you have more flexibility. Okay? Now it's up to you, the application programmer, to decide which one you want. You may just decide you just want to do a standard stuff, or you want to be more efficient, so I'm not going to worry about acknowledgements, I'm going to just do this, it's going to be much faster. It's up to the program. So it gives you a lot more flexibility. And there are many different scientific applications that have very different needs. So you're not locked into one semantics. You have different semantics you can choose from. Okay? Any other questions here? Yes.
Would be some guarantee that the receiving messages on TCP is not
Okay. Does the B-send guarantee that the message is going to be received? B-send is asynchronous. It's going to just give it to the local OS. Some MPI libraries don't use TCP/IP. They are actually LAN-based protocols. They may not even use transport protocol. They're highly optimized, designed for very high-end communication. They may not even use standard Ethernet. So there are other kinds of communication cards and other kinds of protocols. And MPI is not necessarily going to be built over TCP/IP or UDP. It could be the library can use standard protocols, but they don't have to. And they are used for they are basically used for very low latency, high performance communication. The TCP may not always give you. For some MPI libraries, you just short circuit and be written directly on raw hardware, just for very high throughput and high efficiency. Okay. So in some cases, when you do BSend, there is nothing you only given the message to the OS. It doesn't even send it out. There's no guarantee it will be sent out. Messages could of course be dropped, but there could be hardware errors. Then it's up to the application to figure out. If you didn't wait for an act, if no act comes and message is lost, the application has to deal with it. Okay, TCP will handle this for you, but if you choose not to use it, then you have to do things at the application level. So you can trade efficiency for doing more complex error recovery. Okay, so because you got more efficient sends, but then error recovery more complex. So you will deal with that separately. Any other questions here? Has anybody used MPIs before? So now we'll come back to that other question that was saying persistent communication. How do you go about doing it? So there are a whole class of persistent communication systems. They are all called message queuing system or MQS. If you've heard of MQ based system, that's a persistent system. Okay, typically they are used for building enterprise applications. You may not use it when you use TCP/IP simple communication. You don't need. They are fairly heavyweight because they need support for creating disk-based message queues, for queuing messages for long periods of time and sending messages back and forth and so on. So many business to business B2B applications are often built using message queuing system. Okay? Earlier there was this example of e-commerce example of buying something, okay, from an e-commerce store. You can build that using a message queuing system. Okay? When you have an order, you submit an order, it goes into a disk-based queue. At some later point, some order fulfillment application may go and pull all the outstanding orders and start processing it. There may be some other payment system that is also queued up. It may, I guess that you may do the validation of the credit card when you submit the order, but the charging could be done when the goods are actually shipped. So you may keep all that in a message queuing system and so on. So some of these are actually applications that you see in the e-commerce world. They're often built using this persistent parallel. The simplest one that you actually used is email. Email doesn't actually use a real message queuing middleware. Okay, but it is an example of persistent communication. Your inboxes are disk-based queue of messages. Each message is an email message in this case, not some arbitrary message. Okay. Your mail servers, when you send an SMTP message, okay, you use an SMTP server, it has a disk-based queue. It will queue up all of the messages and then each of them is going to send one at a time to the next relay or the receiving mail server and so on. Okay. So although email doesn't actually use a real full-fledged MQS-based middleware, it is nevertheless an example of message-oriented persistent communication. Because all messages, when you get email, are stored on your disk. They are not stored in RAM. You reboot your machine, your mail doesn't disappear. Okay, but if you reboot your machine, all TCP connections will die. Okay, all the message buffers will be lost. Okay, so it is persistent. Okay. So we will not show you some examples and then we will see how this is going to work. So here are here's the canonical example. Your sender and your receiver, there is this one queue. This is an abstract queue. In reality, this queue will be actually a network of queues, one at each hop along the way. But I've just shown this as one queue. Okay. So when the sender sends a message, it comes to this queue, it is going to sit there for arbitrary periods of time. Okay, the receiver can take receipt of it at any point later. Okay. There's no guarantee that it will actually be received at all. Okay, you may decide you're going to stop checking mail at some, let's say, and messages may come and just sit in your inbox, you're not taking delivery of it. But they'll just sit there until your mailbox gets full or some such thing. So in persistent communication, you can have all of these 4 scenarios. The simplest one is when the message is sent and received, both the sender and receiver are running. This is what often happens in transient communication, but this is not the only scenario. Here are some other scenarios. Sender sends a message, when the message is received, the receiver is not running. Okay? Think of email, you sent a message reached the other end, whoever you sent it was not reading their email at that point. The receiver is passive. Okay? Or when the receiver is receiving the message, the sender has disappeared. Again, in the email example, when somebody actually reads a mail you send to them, you may not be sitting on your mail application like that, you may be doing something else. Okay? So that's an example where sender has become passive. And you will have both senders and receiver, neither the sender is running nor the receiver is running, and that message is queued in the network somewhere. Okay, it's in a disk-based queue, it's going to persist there for long periods of time. Okay. So you'll have all of those 4 scenarios being true in this case. Okay, in transient communication, you need to be here essentially for communication to take place. The sender is not running or the receiver is not running, your TCP connections itself will break. Okay, if the sender or receiver dies, the socket is torn down by the OS. You can no longer communicate. That's not true here. Okay, so you don't expect that sender or receiver should be running. Okay, so let's now dig a little deeper into message queuing system. So first of all, what abstraction will you use? In sockets and MPI, you use send and receive. Okay? So here you basically have 2 calls which are sort of canonical call, put and get. Okay? Put allows you to append a message to a certain queue. Okay? You say put, give a message buffer, and then specify the name of the queue, and your message queuing system will insert that message into the specified queue. The receiver has to run get to get a message from the queue. Okay? So here the picture I think is not very clear as to what put and get do, but to do a put at the sender and specify the queue, this queue, the message will go at city. Okay, when the receiver runs, it has to run a get on that queue to take a message out of it. Okay? And get is a blocking call. Okay, it will actually wait, the queue is empty, it will wait. You could also do a poll on the queue, it says, is there any new message? Okay, and then the answer could be yes or no. Okay, your mail client is often going to be doing this. Periodically it's going to poll the mail server saying, has any new mail arrived? It's not going to sit there and wait until new mail comes, simply polling. Okay, so you can implement that by poll, and when the poll says there's a message, you can actually run a get. Okay. You can also ask the system to notify you when there is a new message in the queue by having notify. It says, I'm not going to check. When a new message comes, signal me. Okay, that's a notify call. Okay. So a typical MQS system will at least have these 4 abstract calls. Okay, there will be many more. So you will have a put to send a message, a get to receive a message in blocking mode, poll to check for messages without blocking, and notify for the system to tell you when the message is read. Okay? So that's MQS. And here is now a general architecture of whatever I was talking about. So you will now see how an MQS based systems are built. For each application, there's going to be a send queue and a receive queue if you want communication to be 2-way. And they don't have to be, but let's assume you can do 2-way communication. These queues are going to be now disk-based queues, not memory queues. If they're in memory buffers, then when the machine reboots, the queue will disappear. So your MQS will keep these queues on disk, just as all your mail messages are stored on disk. So here you have these entities R1, R2, R3, they are actually message queuing routers. They are not the same as your network routers. They are application level routers that are actually responsible for taking these messages and routing them to the destination. There are many different destinations you could see. Here your sender, and this is one destination which is receiver B. So when the sender sends a message, it goes to the router sends it to the next one along the path. So this is application level routing of this. Same thing what you do in TCP/IP. But now you're doing it in the application level. But the thing to keep in mind is between each entity here, there may be multiple network routers. Okay? So the communication between a sender and a router R1 may take place over TCP/IP. Okay? But once your message arrives here, it's going to be stored in a disk queue. Then you can use TCP/IP to send it to the next stop. Once it receives there, it will get stored in the disk queue and so on. Okay, so there may be an arbitrary level of network routers between these 2 application level routers. Okay, so in the end, even MQS systems are going to be built using standard protocol like TCP/IP, except that the abstractions that they give you are persistent messages. Okay, just as email runs over TCP/IP, SMTP just runs over TCP/IP, except that when you get a message, you put it in disk queues. Okay, same is true here. Any questions on this? Okay, so these routers are also called relays in certain systems. They essentially perform application level routing of messages and MQS system is. Okay, so I'm going to show some more examples, some more concepts. So here is another entity that you may actually see typically in a message queuing system. It's called a message broker. Okay? Message broker is an intermediary that may provide you some arbitrary service which you can then use to provide higher level functionality. One example what a message broker can do is do format conversions of the message. Message came in a certain format, it can convert them in some other format. Okay, so you basically have this intermediary it can do arbitrary processing of the message, but after it can implement functionality like message conversion. Another functionality you can implement is what is called publish subscribe. Okay? We'll come to publish subscribe systems later on in the course. It is probably the first time you heard of this term. So what happens in a publish subscribe system is when you send a message, you have certain recipients that are subscribed to certain types of messages. Okay? Senders are publishers, they are publishing message. Subscribers are recipients that says anytime you see a message of this type with this attribute, forward a copy to me. So you can subscribe to certain types of messages. Okay. So in this case, pub subsystems would be implemented by a broker. Whenever there's a new message, you have a list of subscriptions. Saying this receiver A is interested in messages of this type. Receiver B is interested in messages of some other type. So for each new message, you basically look at your subscription list and you forward a copy whenever you see a match. So these three receivers have expressed an interest in this message, so you can send them copies. So MQS systems can also be used to implement publish subscribe systems, okay, which will again, pub subsystems will come back to at a later point in time. Just wanted to mention it here because the broker often implements these publish subscribe rules of the sort of message forwarding through a set of rules that are actually maintained. Okay, those are essentially subscriptions. Any questions about this? So I'm going to show you now a real example of a message queuing system. This is a system that is built by IBM, sold by IBM rather. It's called WebSphere MQ, WebSphere message queuing. So if you actually buy this product, it allows you to implement, it's a middleware system, it allows you to implement arbitrary other applications using the abstraction of sending messages and receiving messages where messages persist. Okay, so it is essentially a higher level middleware. So what you will see here, there are lots of different components here, but it's not as complicated. There's a sender and a receiver at the two ends. Because the sender and receiver are communicating using an RPC-like interface. Okay, they're essentially doing a send, receive using RPC-like calls. So you will see the stubs here. Okay, so the stub is essentially implementing your the get, put, all of those calls are being implemented and both on the side. Typically, all of this is in the WebSphere MQ. You write your code in Java. Okay? So this is used for enterprise Java messaging applications as well. So this is why you will see the stubs that do this at both ends. So here are two routers that sit between the sender and the receiver. When a request comes in, you send it to the nearby router where the queues are stored, and then there is an agent here which is actually doing the routing using a routing table. So it's going to send it to the next router in the queue and so on. The important thing to keep in mind is these routers are not the same as your network router. They are actually full-fledged computers that are simply implementing the WebSphere MQ middleware. Okay, they keep track of queues, they decide where to send it next and so on. Between any two routers, you use a traditional network to send your message. And then you just use TCP/IP for a message to be sent from one hop to another, for example. Okay, so this is a commercial product that you can buy and implement many different enterprise applications. There are others in the Java world. There is, I think, something called OpenMQ, which is built on top of Java's messaging service, or JMS. I'm going to give you a small pointer to a web page that will describe some of it for those of you who may be interested in understanding how these systems work in a little more detail. Okay? So there are many such systems out there. Okay, they are all very different from traditional TCP/IP communication. They all implement persistent communication. That's the important thing to keep in mind. Okay, they will all have this notion of a message queue. That is the main abstraction that we are going to use for communication. Okay, is that clear? Any questions on this? Okay, so that was MQS. We are now going to switch gears and talk a little bit for the rest of this class about stream-oriented communication. Okay? This is again very different from whatever we have been talking about. Stream-oriented communication is what is used for sending audio and video data, used for audio and video streaming. It's very different from sending a request and getting back a reply. Okay? So the way typical client-server message passing works is very different from here. That was message-oriented communication. This is stream-oriented communication. Now there are many things to keep in mind when you are talking about audio and video streaming, which make the design of stream-oriented protocols much more complicated. And I'm going to give you some examples here. Okay. So the first thing to keep in mind is whenever you are sending data for audio and video data over a network, you have to keep track of the timing information. Because if the data arrives late at the slide, you are going to get a playback glitch. Okay, because if you are playing some video file and the data doesn't arrive in time, you run out of things to display. You will basically, your video will pause. Okay? And then the user is going to get a not so satisfactory performance because data simply did not arrive on time. This is very different from message-oriented communication, where if a browser's request arrived maybe 1 second late at the server, there's nothing wrong. You'll just see a slower response coming back. You'll just feel that the network is slow, but that's not as bad as I am watching a video and every 10 seconds is freezing and I'm seeing all sorts of glitches. That makes for a very unsatisfactory user experience. So when you're talking about audio and video streaming, you have to also think of the timing of the data. When you send some data from the server to the client, it needs to get there by a certain point in time. If it gets there too late, it's as good as not being getting there at all. Okay. So this is also called as isochronous communication in some scenarios. Now if you are doing video, for example, the timing constraints may be fairly stringent. Okay. A video typically depends on how you encode a video, but typically if you have DVD quality video or better, you will have 30 frames a second. 30 frames are basically 30 images are being seen in the video every second. Okay, so you look at so what a video file is, you will see that a video file is nothing but a set of images. Okay. Playback of this video file essentially means you display this image one after another, and each image is going to be slightly different from the previous image. Because you are displaying them rapidly, you will get the sense of motion and so on. Right, so if there is, let's say, a person walking. So let's say the person is walking, so in the first image, the person may be at the left side of the picture, then the next one is moved a little bit, next one is moved a little bit, and next one is moved a little bit, and so. So these are the images you have captured when you recorded this video. When you play these images at a rapid pace, it looks like the person is moving from left to right. And so that's basically how typically, and so your video file is nothing but a set of images that you have basically captured. And you have to play these images back. Now if you have 30 frames per second recording, just for 30 frames per second, they are capturing 30 images every second. So now if you are playing this back, your server has to send you these 30 images every second. You have to get this data. And if you basically do not get some of this data in time, you will see a playback image. Okay. Same is true of audio. In audio, you are sampling sound, and you're basically sound samples depending on what quality you are sampling, 44 kilohertz per second, you will have 44,000 samples every second. So that's the data you have to send. Okay, so each second you will basically send as much data as you have captured for recording. And if the data starts seeing glitches, and you have to have sure that your streaming protocols will not have these problems. Okay. So very important distinction between typical message oriented or reply response protocols. Okay, messages that get delayed only slow down the system. Here messages that get delayed result in errors in terms of how user perceives the playback. Any questions on this? Okay, so essentially you are there, your message sends are going to have a maximum bound on end-to-end delay. You want the message to get there by a certain amount. So you'll bound the delay or the time the message can take to propagate on the network. If the network can give you a guarantee, then you are in good shape. That says that the network will say it's going to deliver the message. Now today's networks, the internet is not giving you any guarantee. Internet is a best effort network. It doesn't make any guarantees when you send when the message will be received or if the message will be received. It's completely best effort. So you are trying to implement an application that has some real-time requirements on top of a best effort network that doesn't give you any guarantees at all. Okay. This makes it much more complicated to design audio and video streaming protocols and yet give good user experience. Okay. There were proposals and prototype networks that were built that could give explicit guarantees. Okay. You could make a reservation in the network saying, I want to reserve a 1 megabit path from the sender to the receiver and I want an end-to-end delay of no more than 200 milliseconds. Okay. And the network would then reserve those resources and say, I have reserved the resources and I can give you this guarantee. What that means is now the network says that you will actually have a dedicated 1 megabit reservation and it's guaranteeing an end-to-end bound. Designing these kinds of networks are a lot more complex because you need the ability to go and reserve resources in the network. The routers need to have state and so on, and they are more complicated to design and they never took off. Okay? And internet is the way it is, which is the best effort. Yeah, so now we are left with the task of building stream-oriented protocols that have these kinds of timeliness constraints on top of a best effort network. What that means is, in most cases, if the network is not congested, your performance will be fine. Okay, if the network is loaded, your YouTube is not going to do you any favors. It's going to have glitches in the way you are going to see your playback. And that's how what a best effort network can do. Okay. But let's go and talk about how you can implement some streaming protocols, okay, which are still very different. So first thing, the other thing is, first is real-time requirement. The other thing is this is primarily push-based. Okay. So your player is going to say play. Okay. It's not going to say give me the next image, next. So you're not sending just because you have to display 30 frames a second. You're not sending 30 requests every second saying send me the next image. That's one way you could have implemented a player which keeps asking give me the next image I'm done, give me the next image. You don't do that. You simply say play. And the server is going to just start streaming this data. It will start sending this data at steady intervals to the client. The client is simply listening on a socket, data just keeps flowing and it just takes the data and displays it. This is how you will have push-based communication and not request-response-based. You basically only say one time you say go and then data starts flowing. Okay. That's an important difference. So it's push-oriented, not pull-based. Okay. And here are just two examples of many different scenarios where you need audio and video streaming. The first example is conferencing systems. Okay, if you use Skype, for example, or a video conference over Skype, that's an example of what's going on, where you have a camera that's capturing this data and it's sending it to the other end. Okay? And there's maybe a camera at the other end that's sending data to, there's two ways. This is to show you one way. Okay, when you have audio and video conferencing, the real-time requirements become even more stringent. Okay, because for you to have a natural conversation with your other party, any data that you capture needs to be sent to the other end in around 100-150 milliseconds. If you take longer, you start seeing unsatisfactory performance. When you say something Okay, and you assume that the other parties heard it, but the data hasn't gotten there. And then when they reply, you are again talking about the next sentence, and then you all have all sorts of confusion. Okay, so when you have real-time conferencing, I shouldn't say real-time, live video conferencing, the requirements on what you expect from the network are even more stringent. Okay. Now, on the other hand, if the sender was a server that was simply sending you a movie, okay, the end-to-end requirement is not that stringent because you can wait. Once you hit play, you can wait for 10 seconds for the playback to start. And once the playback starts, all the data keeps coming, you are happy. You are not expecting that as soon as you hit send, within 100 milliseconds, your playback should start. But that's not a requirement. In conferencing, when you say something, or your video camera captures something, you expect for a normal two-way conversation that the data has actually reached the other end in hundreds of milliseconds. Maybe 100 to 200 milliseconds is normal. Okay. That's everything. That's capture, encode, send, receive at the other end, decode, display. All of that entire pipeline needs to be 100 to 200 millisecond latency. Okay. So there is live streaming, which is this. There's what's called stored streaming, which is simply all the movies are on a server, it's all data stored, you're simply sending the data to me. There are different applications. Okay. And then there is multicast streaming, okay, which is basically here. This is used in webcasts. If you have, let's say, sports game, or you are doing a webinar, you may have one source and multiple recipients, where you do the send once, and something is actually making sure all the recipients receive it. And you can also stream to multiple recipients. That's group communication. Okay. Any questions here before I show some of these ideas in more detail? So let's continue and talk a little bit about quality of service. So because you are now expecting the network to give you a certain level of quality of data that you are sending, which is you may want to bound the end-to-end delay, you may want a certain amount of bandwidth, you may want to only tolerate a certain amount of loss. You can specify the characteristics of what you want from the network for satisfactory application performance in terms of what is referred to as quality of service or QoS matrix. Okay, so this is quality of service is often acronym you will see is QoS. These days you may also see something called QoE, which is quality of experience, which is what the user perceives to be an experience that they saw when they saw this movie or so. So QoS can have many different metrics associated, depending on what the application wants. So here are some examples. Required bit rate at which the data should be sent. If you encoded your movie at, let's say, 1 megabit per second high definition or some higher quality, you expect to be data to be streamed, the network should at least have a bandwidth of 1 megabit per second it's giving. If you have much less than that, you will not be able to send that much data. So that's a bandwidth requirement on the quality. So that says for this quality movie, I need at least a megabit. Otherwise, you will not be able to see good quality. If you are less than that, you can't send that data in real time. You may also have maximum delay, end-to-end delay. This is important when you are doing video conference. So I send the data. If you are going to take half a second to deliver it, that's too long. That's not good for natural two-way conversation. Whenever I speak, the other end, the way humans actually perceive speech and sort of video is when you are actively interacting, you basically expect no more than 100 to 200 millisecond lag between when I say it and when the other person hears it. Okay? So the same thing, constraints are true in a real system. The conferencing system needs to guarantee you some amount of output. So that can be another metric for quality of service. You can also bound what is called the variance or the jitter. Jitter essentially says what is the variation in how long packets are taking to reach at the other. Maybe one packet took a second, another one took 1.2 seconds, the other one took 0.8 seconds. So that means there is more jitter. Okay, the delay is actually fluctuating, it's not steady. Okay. Jitter basically says that the lower jitter essentially states that the end-to-end delay is actually not fluctuating. There's variance in the end-to-end delay, you get what is called jitter, where there is some packets take longer, some packets take shorter. If you want steady delivery, you want to bound the jitter as well. Yeah. And you may want to bound the maximum round trip time, which you can do if you maximum bound the endpoint D. So depending on what your streaming applications need, you can specify some of these characteristics, and these are the characteristics you expect from the network. Now, as I said, the internet is not going to guarantee you this, but you can certainly run some tests to figure out if you are to actually start streaming this data, does the network have enough resources to sustain your session? And based on that, you can say maybe this is not a good time, I cannot send you this data with good quality. But as I said, in old there were networks that were designed where you could specify this QoS, the network would go and actually reserve those resources to guarantee you these characteristics. And those networks would actually make those guarantees to you. Today's networks don't. But nevertheless, it's important to understand what quality you are expecting from the network to successfully stream audio or video. Is that clear? So these are just more metrics. I'm not going to go into a lot of details here. So you can specify QoS using any number of metrics. The key ones I mentioned here. Here are some more. It says maximum transmission rate. We talk about token bucket in a minute. There's a sensitivity. How much loss can you tolerate? How much delay can you tolerate? And so on. Okay. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about one OS level mechanism that you can use to enforce some of these guarantees, at least at the endpoints. Okay. Now the network is the best effort network, but the OS can actually give you a little bit of guarantees on how it is sent, data is being sent, and so on. Okay. And that basically, so that is the mechanism is called a token bucket regulator or a rate regulator. Okay. And this is one way by which you can specify the quality of service metric to your operating system. Okay, I'm going to show you the example here first, and then we'll talk about what it does. So token bucket essentially it has mechanism has two parameters, okay? A rate R and a burst B that you specify. So this says I'm going to send data at this rate, let's say packets per second or bits per second, doesn't matter what. So it says R packets per second. But I'm not going to be bound to a steady rate of R. I am allowed to basically fluctuate, and then the fluctuations are captured by a burst, saying every once in a while I can send B packets all at once. That's the maximum burst I'm allowed to have for this stream. So this captures the steady rate at which you send data and the burstiness in how you send the data, which is allowed to send more packets all at once, up to B packets at once. So this is one way by which you can specify the bandwidth that you need from the stream and how much burstiness you are willing to, the system needs to sustain from the stream. So any token bucket mechanism is going to have these two rates, two parameters. Now what is shown here is once you have specified these two parameters, how is the OS going to ensure that you are not going to violate what you said you would do? Okay, that it will police the stream so that it conforms to a rate of R and a burst of B. And the way it does this is very simple. Okay, so this is also called leaky bucket. So this is OS won't have a bucket in there, but that's an abstraction. So what happens is you basically, when you send a packet, you need to have a token that you can grab in order for the packet to be sent out. Okay. So when the stream starts, you'll essentially have B tokens in your bucket. And you're going to generate tokens at a rate of R every second. So every 1 over R second, you generate a new token and you put it in the bucket. Okay, the bucket depth is B. That means you can accumulate up to B tokens. If you have excess tokens, you throw them away. So whenever you're now sending a packet, okay, you have to grab a token. Okay, if there's no token, you have to wait for one to be regenerated. Every 1 over R seconds, a new token is generated. So you'll wait for it to be generated, and as soon as you have a token, the OS will say, okay, this packet can go out, it has a matching token. Right? Is that clear what I said or no? Okay, so the way your OS is going to police that the stream conforms to a rate R and a burst B is you basically have this notion of a token. Tokens are being generated by the OS for this stream once every 1/r seconds, okay, and you have maximum, you allow maximum accumulation of B tokens. Okay, that's your burst. Okay. So what does this mean? If the application generates B packets at once, and your bucket is full, there are B tokens, they will instantaneously go into the network. None of them will be stopped. And they can all go out all at once. Okay. But once you do that, all your bucket will be empty because all the B tokens you have are gone. So at this point, you are basically going to be limited by a token being generated every 1/r, and you will have to wait for a new token to be generated before you can send the next packet out. Okay, so at any point you can send an instantaneous burst of B packets. But the average rate at which you are allowed to send packet is going to be limited by R packets a second. Because you need to have a token that's generated for you. So this is an example of an OS level mechanism that can enforce a quality of service metric that you specify. Okay, there are many operating systems that will actually have implementations of these token bucket regulators. I'll talk more about them next time because I've run out of time here. But I just wanted to give you some example mechanisms and how they are implemented. And routers could do the same thing. Okay? So this is how you can implement QoS at a router level. If you say, I reserve enough bandwidth for the stream, and the stream is going to send at most R packets per second with occasional bursts of B. The router actually has to implement a token bucket to ensure that you are not violating, you don't oversend. Okay, if you oversend, then basically your packets can be dropped. So you have to conform to whatever you said, and then whatever resources are reserved will be sufficient. Okay, so this is how you could use QoS mechanisms and implement them. Okay. We are out of time, so we'll continue this token bucket discussion next time. Okay. Just before you go, there is going to be one last makeup class this Friday, at which point we will catch up with the 3 missed classes that have sort of gone by because of snow closure. Okay, so send an email out again one last time with this Friday. You'll have to come, and then we should be caught up with the rest of the semester. All right?